I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, there were signs. Little ones, barely noticeable at first, but they were there. Hindsight has a cruel way of making things clearer, sharper, like a knife twisting in a wound you didn't even know you had. It started when Emma decided to go back to school. She'd been talking about it on and off for years, saying she wanted something more, though she never really explained what more meant. I supported her, of course. I thought it was a good thing. She'd spent so much of the last few years at home, and I figured this would make her happy, give her something to focus on outside of the house. I didn't realize then that her search for more wasn't just about a career or learning something new. When she came home after her first day, she was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She talked about her classes, the professor who'd made an impression on her, Dr. Graham, she said his name was. I didn't think much of it. Of course, she'd talk about her professor. He was part of her new world, a world I wasn't really part of. But over the next few weeks, his name started coming up more and more. Dr. Graham said this, or Dr. Graham suggested I try that. She'd bring up his lectures during dinner, her eyes lighting up as she repeated something he'd said. I told myself it was just the excitement of being back in school. I told myself that this was good for her, for us. I didn't notice it at first, but there was a growing distance between us. It wasn't anything dramatic. We still had dinner together, still talked about our days. But there was a shift, a subtle pulling away. She was spending more time on campus, staying late for group projects or study sessions. When she got home, she'd be tired but distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. One night, I asked her if everything was okay. She looked at me like she didn't understand the question. Of course, she said with a small smile, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. I'm just busy, that's all. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. The first time I really felt the weight of it was when I came across her notebook on the kitchen counter. She'd left it open to a page where she'd been scribbling ideas for a project. At the bottom of the page, in the corner, there was a little doodle, a pair of initials circled in the margin. AG. I stared at it for longer than I should have, my gut twisting. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People doodle all the time. But something about it felt wrong, like a tiny fracture spreading through glass. When I asked her about her day that night, she didn't mention him. She told me about her classes, her classmates, but not Dr. Graham. And for some reason, that made it worse. It wasn't like I suspected her right away. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who gets jealous over nothing. But there was something in the way she said his name, or didn't say it, that kept tugging at me. A feeling I couldn't shake. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we were fine, weren't we? We had a good life, a solid marriage. This was just a rough patch, a new adjustment. She was focused on school, and I was giving her the space she needed. But that night, as I lay awake in bed next to her, I realized I couldn't remember the last time she looked at me the way she lit up when she talked about him. The distance between us didn't happen all at once. It was slow, creeping, like the tide pulling further and further away from the shore before you realize it's gone. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I hadn't been paying enough attention to her, hadn't been as present as I should have been. Emma was busy with school, and I tried to respect that. I told myself it was temporary. But the more she threw herself into her classes, the less she seemed to be here with me. Physically, she was around, but emotionally, it felt like she was somewhere else entirely. It became little things. She'd stay out late working on projects, sometimes until after I'd already gone to bed. The first few times, I didn't think much of it. She was excited, I could see that, and I didn't want to get in the way of her growth. But then it became a pattern. When I'd ask her about it, she'd brush it off. You know how it is, she'd say, her tone light but dismissive. Group projects, deadlines. It's just a busy time right now. Do you want me to come pick you up sometime? Maybe we can grab a coffee after you're done, I offered one night. She hesitated. That's sweet, but I don't want to keep you up late. You have work in the morning. I didn't press the issue. I wanted to trust her. That's what a good husband does, right? But then there was Dr. Graham. His name wasn't coming up as much anymore, which should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Instead, it made me uneasy. Before, she'd talked about him constantly, his lectures, his advice, how he made her feel confident. But now, there was a deliberate kind of silence when it came to him. One evening, I casually asked, "How's Dr. Graham? You haven't mentioned him in a while." Emma paused, just for a second, but it was enough. "He's fine," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We've just been busy with the internship stuff. Nothing exciting." Her answer felt, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it. Flat, like she was trying to sound casual but ended up giving too much away. That night, I couldn't get the conversation out of my head. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Was I imagining things? Overthinking? I hated how paranoid I felt. This was Emma, my wife, my partner. We'd built a life together. We trusted each other. I had to trust her. But as the weeks went on, the distance between us grew wider. She was more guarded, more preoccupied. I tried to connect with her, to bridge the gap. I started asking her more about her classes, offering to help around the house more so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. But nothing seemed to make a difference. And then, one night, I found her phone. I wasn't snooping. At least, that's what I told myself. She'd left it on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and I just picked it up. The screen lit up with a notification, an email. The subject line caught my attention, "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow." It was from him. Dr. Graham. I opened the email, my hands shaking. It wasn't long, just a few lines. He was thanking her for the other night and saying how much he valued their time together. My heart dropped. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting on the couch, holding her phone in my hands. I don't think I'd ever felt so numb. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up. Emma froze. She didn't need to ask what I was talking about. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. "It's not what you think," she said again, but her voice was trembling, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. My chest felt tight, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Then tell me," I said, my voice low, trying to stay calm even as my hands shook. "Tell me what it is." She sat down on the edge of the couch, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to shield herself from what was coming. She didn't answer right away. Her silence stretched between us, suffocating. "Emma," I pressed. "You need to tell me the truth. What's going on?" She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Was it regret? Fear? Or was it something worse, something like relief that she didn't have to keep lying anymore? "It's complicated," she finally said. Her words came out in a whisper, and I felt my stomach drop. "No," I said sharply. "Don't give me that. Don't you dare tell me it's complicated. Just say it." She flinched at my tone, but I didn't care. I couldn't do this anymore, the guessing, the paranoia, the endless pit in my gut that told me something was wrong. "It started out, innocent," she began, her voice shaking. "I swear. It was just work at first. Late nights, brainstorming for the internship. He was so easy to talk to, and I felt like he understood me in a way that..." She stopped herself, biting her lip. "In a way that I don't." I finished for her. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, and I hated how raw they made me feel. That's not what I mean, she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't about you, Mark. It wasn't. I felt so lost for so long. And then she trailed off, looking down at her hands. I felt my jaw tighten. Then what, Emma? Say it. She finally looked up at me, her face pale, her expression broken. Then he made me feel like I mattered again, she admitted, her voice barely audible. He made me feel like I wasn't just a wife, or a student, or someone stuck in a rut. He made me feel alive. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Alive. As if our life together had been suffocating her, as if everything I'd given her, the love, the stability, the home we'd built, wasn't enough. I stared at her, struggling to keep my voice steady. Did you sleep with him? Her silence told me everything. She didn't need to say it. I saw the truth written all over her face. How many times? I asked, my voice flat now, emotionless. Mark. How many times, Emma? She broke then, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed into her hands. It wasn't supposed to happen, she choked out. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It just happened. I didn't know how to stop it. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built my life with, had betrayed me, and now she was sitting here, telling me it had just happened, like it was some kind of accident. How long? I asked, my voice cold. A few months, she admitted, barely able to meet my eyes. I couldn't breathe. A few months. She'd been coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, smiling at me over dinner, for months, while she was giving herself to someone else. I stood up, needing to put space between us. My hands were trembling, my heart racing. You could have stopped, I said bitterly, staring down at her. You chose not to. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know, Mark. I hate myself for it. I do. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, Emma, I snapped. You destroyed us. You destroyed everything. She broke into sobs again, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not now. Not when the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I could trust with my life, had been lying to me for months. I need time, I said finally, my voice shaking with anger and pain. I can't do this right now. Mark, please. But I didn't let her finish. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. In that moment, I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal, or the realization that I hadn't seen it coming. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the guilt, the tears, and it felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The house was silent except for the occasional sound of Emma's muffled sobs from the living room. I stayed in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed we'd shared for years, staring at the floor like it could somehow give me the answers I needed. I kept replaying her words in my head, over and over. It wasn't supposed to happen. What did that even mean? She didn't trip and fall into his bed. She made a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice to betray me, to lie to me, to live a double life while I sat at home completely blind to it all. By the time the sun came up, I still hadn't decided what to do. My mind was a mess of anger, pain, and confusion. I wanted to scream at her, to demand more answers, to make her feel the kind of hurt she'd inflicted on me. But part of me also wanted to hold on to what we had, to believe that maybe, somehow, we could fix this. I hated myself for even considering it, but love doesn't just disappear overnight, no matter how much someone breaks you. When I finally walked out of the bedroom, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't slept either, her eyes were puffy and red, her hair a tangled mess. She was holding a mug of coffee, but her hands were trembling so much that it looked like she might drop it. Mark, she started, her voice hoarse, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said. Not yet. I'm not ready to hear it. She nodded silently, tears pooling in her eyes again. I hated the sight of her tears now. They used to mean something to me, used to tug at my heart and make me want to protect her. But now, they just felt hollow, like a performance for an audience of one. I sat down across from her, the table feeling like a chasm between us. I stared at her, taking in the woman I thought I knew so well, and I couldn't help but wonder who she'd become when I wasn't looking. Or maybe she hadn't changed at all. Maybe I just hadn't seen her clearly before. How did it happen? I finally asked, my voice cold and quiet. She flinched at the question, but she didn't look away. I don't know, she said softly. It started small. He just listened to me, you know. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible. Invisible? I repeated, my voice rising. What the hell does that mean, Emma? Were you invisible in this house? In this marriage? Because I sure as hell didn't think so. Her lip trembled, but she held my gaze. You didn't do anything wrong, Mark. It wasn't about you. It was about me. I felt lost. Like I didn't know who I was anymore. And then he. Then he what? I snapped. Swept in and saved you. Is that what you're telling yourself to make this easier to justify? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No. That's not what I mean. I didn't plan for this to happen. I swear to you, I didn't. It just. I let it go too far. Too far, I repeated bitterly. How far is too far, Emma? Was it just once? Or was it every time you told me you were staying late at school? Her silence was deafening. She stared down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. And just like that, any hope I had left crumbled into dust. How many times? I asked, my voice shaking now. How many times did you sleep with him? Mark, please. How many times? I shouted, slamming my hand on the table so hard that the mug in her hands jolted. 3, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It only happened 3 times. And after the last time, I told him it was a mistake. I ended it. I swear to you, Mark, it's over. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her in disbelief. 3 times. That was supposed to make it better, wasn't it? Like the number mattered. Like it hurt less because it wasn't 4, or 5, or 10. And what about now? I asked. You still see him, don't you? At school. At the internship. Are you seriously telling me that's not part of your life anymore? Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I don't know what to do, she sobbed. I can quit the internship. I can drop out of school if that's what it takes. I just want to fix this. I want to fix us. Us? I let out a bitter laugh. There is no us anymore, Emma. Not the way there was before. You destroyed that the moment you let him into your life. She sobbed harder, and for a moment, I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness. Just emptiness. I stood up, unable to look at her anymore. I need space, I said, my voice hollow. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do now. Mark, please don't leave, she begged, reaching out for me. But I stepped back, shaking my head. You already left, Emma, I said quietly. You just didn't bother telling me. And with that, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door. The day Emma told me she was pregnant should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it broke me in ways I didn't know were possible. We'd been living in this strange limbo for weeks, me sleeping on the couch most nights, barely speaking to each other. She had begged me to go to counseling, to try to repair the marriage, but I just couldn't bring myself to commit to that. Not when every time I looked at her, I saw him. Not when I could still hear the words she'd said the night she confessed. He made me feel alive. I was hanging on by a thread, trying to figure out if there was anything left worth salvaging, when she came home one night, pale and nervous. She said she needed to talk, and the look on her face told me it wasn't going to be good. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. For a second, I felt this flash of something, hope, maybe. A spark of the life we used to dream about together. But then reality came crashing down. My stomach turned as the words sank in. "Is it mine?" I asked bluntly, my voice cold. She flinched, tears immediately welling in her eyes. I don't know," she admitted, and in that moment, it felt like the last piece of my heart shattered. I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her, the woman I had built my life around, the woman I thought I knew, and I realized there was no coming back from this. Not for me. "Mark, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "It might be yours. We can figure this out together. I'll take a test. I'll do whatever it takes. I need you." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You need me?" I said, my voice rising. "Emma, you didn't need me when you were sneaking around behind my back. You didn't need me when you were in his bed. And now you want me to clean up the mess you made?" "It wasn't like that," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, but this baby, it could be our chance to fix things. To start over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "A chance?" I snapped. "Emma, you don't get to use a baby as some kind of reset button for what you've done. Do you even hear yourself right now?" She broke down completely then, sinking to her knees in front of me. "I love you," she sobbed. "I love you, Mark. I don't love him. It was a mistake. Please, please don't give up on us." I looked down at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anything at all. I was numb. "You should have thought about that before," I said quietly. I left the house that night and went to stay with a friend. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I barely spoke. She called and texted constantly, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I told her I'd come back to the house when she got the paternity test done, and until then, I didn't want to see her. The day the results came in, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if I was going to fall or be pulled back to safety. When she handed me the envelope, her hands were shaking so much that I thought she might drop it. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. The baby wasn't mine. I don't know how long I stared at the paper, the words blurring in front of me. Emma was crying again, saying something about how sorry she was, how she never wanted this to happen. But I couldn't hear her anymore. It was like a switch had flipped in my brain, shutting everything down. "This is it," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I'm done, Emma. I can't do this anymore. Mark, please." "No," I said firmly, standing up. "You made your choice, Emma. And now I'm making mine." I filed for divorce the next day. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Even after everything, there were days when I missed her so much it physically hurt. I missed the way things used to be, the version of her I thought I knew, the life we had planned together. But every time I thought about going back, I reminded myself of the lies, the betrayal, the way she looked at me and told me she didn't know if the baby was mine. That wasn't love. That wasn't a life I could live. Emma kept the baby, and from what I hear through mutual friends, she's still in contact with Dr. Graham. I try not to think about it. It doesn't matter anymore. I've started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. It's not easy, and there are days when the pain still feels fresh, like it just happened yesterday. But I'm learning to move forward. I loved her once. I probably always will, in some way. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, the damage is too deep, the trust too shattered, to ever be whole again. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to let go.